Hey everybody, this is Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, and today I am going to be going over my top 10 most controversial opinions on fantasy books, with a little bit of sci-fi thrown in there too. So over the months since I've had my channel, every now and then I make a take that I get a lot of varying opinions on in the comments based on what I said. And I want to go over the top 10 today on what those are because I think it'd be fun. I hope I don't upset you too much with this video, but you know, it is what it is. They're my opinions and I am sticking to them. So let's start with number one. And my number one most controversial take is that I believe that the Lord of the Rings books are overrated and that the movies are better. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that I think that they're bad. In fact, I think they're very good. But I don't think they're the pinnacle of fantasy like virtually all other fantasy book reviewers tend to think. They're very good, but that's about it. Now, I do think that they're the most important fantasy books that have ever been written, but I don't think they're the best. I don't even think they're top 10 or maybe even top 20. They're just very good and very important. Now, you know, it's weird when it comes to this with fantasy, how defensive people get over that opinion. Now, I don't think people have this opinion about other genres like movies, you know. I think, for example, that Citizen Kane is the most important movie of all time. But I don't think you're going to hear a lot of people, almost none, they're going to claim that Citizen Kane is the best movie of all time and that it holds up as true today. That's a ridiculous take. But that's what you hear people say about Lord of the Rings, a book series that was written 70 years ago. Now, I think, and I'm going on a limb here, that a reason a lot of people say this is because of nostalgia. Almost everybody that's into fantasy have read Lord of the Rings when they were, you know, a teenager. And nostalgia plays such a major role into what we like as book reviewers. Stuff that you really liked when you're younger typically is stuff that you're going to have a very fond memory of. Now with The Lord of the Rings, it's a little more special because while it is very enjoyable when you're younger and it's a very good intro into fantasy, there's more that you can get out of it as you get older. But I fully believe that if you were not to read Lord of the Rings as a kid and you read it after you read other fantasy works as an adult, you would just think it's okay. That's how it is for me. I didn't read Lord of the Rings when I was younger. I read Lord of the Rings recently after I had read hundreds of fantasy books. So I didn't have any of that nostalgia to go after. And as such, it's very dated. I mean, just the way that the book is written is very dated. It uses a very archaic type of writing. And there's a reason that that's not used anymore. Not just because that's not how people talk anymore, but it doesn't read as clearly and cleanly as it could alternatively be done. The plot of the book, it can get very slow. It's got major pacing issues. It's got very strange POV choices where you have entire books without some of the characters. And some books that are extremely focused on certain characters. There is a reason that books don't do that anymore. There's a reason that books will interlace POVs all the time. Now, as you read modern fantasy books, you'll say that there's so much influence. It almost feels like The Lord of the Rings is, you know, a generic type of book. But it's generic because it's the grandfather of all fantasy. But I don't believe that it can hold its weight when compared to some of the greats of modern day written fantasy if you took away all of the bias. That's just how I feel. I'm sticking with it. And I know virtually everybody that watches this video is going to say, Matt, that is a crazy take, but I am sticking to it. My number two most controversial take is that I believe that the Broken Earth trilogy, specifically the 5th season, which is the first book, is so bad that it's essentially unreadable. I don't remember a book that I've read that I believe personally is as bad as this one. And it shocks me that not only is this book extremely popular, but every single book in the trilogy won the Hugo Award for the best book. This is a beloved series. that many people claim this is the best fantasy series of all time. And I could not have a more contrary opinion to my feeling about this book. The fact that a third of this book was written in the second person is a ridiculous, ridiculous thing. The second person does not work when it comes to books. It works in some other forms of media. It works in video games. It works quite well in video games, where you can picture yourself as the main character and people are talking to you in that way. But in a book, it comes off so odd that it's off-putting and difficult to suck in. There is a reason that virtually no books utilize the second person, and it's not because they're not as smart as N.K. Jemisin that they haven't been able to pull it off. It's because it doesn't work. And I believe constantly as I read this book that Jemisin was trying to be too smart, and it came off as ridiculous. The second person is horrible. The way that she writes is atrocious at times, where she uses these italics and bolds and all caps within the text to really drive home a point, to really make this strong emphasis. You shouldn't have to rely on that to make a really strong point. It comes off as kind of crazy. I thought the twist that was in this book, and there is a major one, and I still don't know if it actually occurs because I didn't finish the book. I got 95% of the way through and I said, I cannot bear to finish this book. But I'm about 100% confident that there is a major twist that happens at the end of this book that is so obvious that it becomes one of the most telegraphed and poor choices for a twist that I've ever read. I can't say what it is, but I can say that myself, and I suspect a great many of readers, figured out what it is within the first 50 or so pages. And it's not so much that the twist is ruined. You know, I've figured out twists before, and it's disappointing. It doesn't happen a lot for me. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm oftentimes the last person to pick up on these things, and I really do like it that way. I prefer to be surprised. I don't want to figure stuff out. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want to be, you know, the dummy that is the last one to get it. But man, it's obvious. And the problem, though, is that the way that the book is structured, with this really bouncing around in a timeline, is ruined because of the twist. It's a really poor way to tell this story, and the story would have been much preferable to be in a more cohesive, clear, linear fashion. And I don't think that's true for all books. I think some books that use time jumps and these different point of views and these things can be very, very good. Some of my favorite books utilize that. But I think the book sacrificed a great deal in quality to do this, and it didn't work. The twist did not achieve its stated goals. Now, when I've said this before, I heard a lot of people in the comments say, you're supposed to figure it out. No, you're not. That is a retrospective retelling of the events to try to justify what occurred in this book. Now, the last thing I'll say about a major reason that I disliked this book is the way that characters move on from traumatic events. I think it's horrible. Some horrible things happen in this book, and this book bills itself as being a tearjerker and just very depressing, and these bad things happen, and that's true for the large part, but the characters have these horrible things happen, and they reminisce about them for a moment, and they take it in, and then they just move on. And that's crazy. That's not real life. When horrible things happen, people sit with them for great amounts of time, and maybe in later books, they reinvestigate this. But in this first book, man, it didn't work well. So I can't say enough negative things about this book, and I am absolutely floored at how popular this book and this book series are. My third most controversial take is that I believe that George R. R. Martin, the author of A Song of Ice and Fire, popularly known as A Game of Thrones, and that Patrick Rothfuss, the author of Kingkiller Chronicle, and that Scott Lynch, the author of Gentlemen Bastards, that I am completely okay with them never finishing out their series. And man, I see a lot of hate towards these three guys for taking so long to get to the next book in their series. And I can't connect with that mindset at all for a number of reasons. First of all, I get that a lot of promises have been broken from all three of these people, namely George R. R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss. Timelines come, updates don't come out. It doesn't seem like these books are ever actually going to come out. But it's okay. These are people. They have real life that hits them. Many times I miss my deadlines. Many times I try to promise something and I can't achieve it. These are people with huge pressure on them. And I totally get it that maybe the pressure is too big. Maybe in the case of Rothfuss and Lynch, that they have some inner struggles that they're going through with mental health issues. I think that's the case for both of them. I know it is for Scott Lynch. And I am very compassionate towards that issue. I get it. For George R. R. Martin, he's got so much success that has come from the shows, and he's living his best life. This guy is a TV guy, and all of a sudden his books became the hottest TV thing of the modern generation, especially for fantasy. And that's what he loves. And he's getting over the books, and I get it. You know, I also feel this way because I don't think that these books have to finish out their series to be considered all-time greats. There is a reason that all three of these series are so beloved. Because even without the next books coming out, they're wonderful for what they are. And you don't have to have an ending to a story to make that journey worthwhile. I will always recommend all three of these series to anybody, even if they're not going to finish, because the journey is worth it. I did a video not that long ago where I asked my favorite, I think it was 27 fantasy booktubers what their favorite book was. And many people said that it was A Storm of Swords, the third book in A Song of Ice and Fire. And they did not say that with the prerequisite that the next books have to come out, otherwise I'm going to revise my opinion. No, they said that because that book is freaking awesome. At least one person said that A Name of the Wind is their favorite. And they did not say that because there was a prerequisite that the last book has to come out. No, it's just a great book. Read books and enjoy them. And if they never come out, guess what? There's a million other fantasy books that you can enjoy, and many that are even better than these. And you don't have to have these come out to be able to enjoy these series. My next most unpopular opinion is that I believe that Harry Dresden is sexist and a horrible, horrible person when it comes to his perspectives on women. And I've said this, and people will fight me to no end about this. They say that he is just an old school kind of gentleman, that, you know, he's respectful towards women, and it can come off a little weird sometimes, but nothing more than that. What? We are not reading the same books at all. Harry Dresden treats women extremely differently than he does men. And it's not always positive. I believe that he is constantly, not a little bit, but he is constantly thinking about women from a sexual perspective. And it's really awkward in a lot of moments. Jim Butcher wrote this book where essentially every woman is this super hot, super sexy woman that Dresden's just drooling all over. And it's so weird to read. I have heard from people when I've said this, that yeah, that is kind of true for the first few books, but he grows and he gets out of it. No, he doesn't. I'm going to read you a quote from Jim Butcher that Dresden says that is in this book. She pushed back her asphalt-colored hair with one hand and gave me a look of pure calculation. Then she simply crossed her legs so that the cut of her dress left one pale leg bare to mid-thigh. A subtle motion of her back thrust out her young, firm breasts so that their tips pressed visibly against the fabric. Of course, Mr. Dresden, I'm sure we can do business. The look she gave me was direct, sensual, and willing. This is not just a one-off statement. This is constant. And this doesn't have anything to do with my argument, but it is so weird to say the tip of her breasts. Does Dresden not know that nipples are a thing? That there's a word for this? Dresden is like what a neckbeard thinks a gentleman is. It's really strange. And it gets very, very bizarre, even as the series goes on. Hope Carpenter is this normal, vanilla human. She is not a fae. She's not this vampire. She's a normal woman. In fact, she's not a woman when this part comes up. She is a teenage child. She is somebody that we have known from this book, and Dresden has known since she was a baby. And in the second to most recent book in the series, Peace Talks, he has to comment on how puberty has been uncommonly generous to her. That is a crazy statement. And it is so bad. And it makes me feel like Dresden is essentially unreadable at a certain point. In book 8, Proven Guilty, there is a 17-year-old girl named Molly. Quote, she wore a tight tank top, its fabric white, thin, and strained by the curves of her breasts. But wait, that's not all. There were miniature barbell-shaped bulges at the tips of her breasts. Another tips of the breast comment. Where the thin fabric emphasized rather than concealed them. I didn't want to know what else had been pierced. I know I didn't, because I told myself that very sternly. I did not want to know, even if it was, hell, a little intriguing. Nah, Dresden, that's weird. My next most unpopular opinion is that I believe that Red Rising did not need a second part to this series. I thought the original trilogy to Red Rising had its ups and downs, but it ended so good. And when something ends really good, I believe pretty strongly that you should just move on. And that when you continue something that ends really good, that it can kind of be fan service at that point. Or you're just trying to milk something that didn't need to be milked. Now, I am just going to go on a limb here and say I could very well be wrong about this opinion. And I've had to second guess my opinion on this recently when I've talked about this with people. Because they tell me that yes, the first book in the next part of this series was not great. It didn't set things up awesome, but you gotta read the next one, Dark Age. And that's where you really come to appreciate the story here, and that it really did need to be told. I don't think I'm wrong. And I do think eventually, based on how much I've been told this opinion, that I should just read Dark Age. It's not going to be soon. My enthusiasm is completely zapped from this. But maybe I will revise my opinion. But I really don't think I am. This has happened a lot of times, where an author just continues something that did not need to be continued. We are going to talk about one later on in the series. But another one I'm going to say is The Powder Mage. I thought The Powder Mage was a very good trilogy. I thought the next trilogy that came after that was quite poor and did not need to be told. Oftentimes I think authors just need to know when to stop. It's hard, I get it. But you can write other things. You don't have to write in the same world. Just move on. Man, I can't say enough positive things about the way the Red Rising trilogy ended. It's so good. Why, Pierce Brown, why did you have to ruin things for me and leave me with such a negative taste in my mouth when I did not have it? I went through a rough journey with Red Rising. I did not love the first and second books. I thought the first book was kind of bad. I thought the second book was okay. I thought the third book was okay until it had one of the better endings that I've ever read in my life across any genre. Just move on. You're a good writer. You don't have to stay here anymore. Let's see what else you got. Next up is my belief that Mistborn Era 1 is about 10 times better than Mistborn Era 2. It's not even close. I thought that Mistborn Era 1 is just sublime. I am not normally a YA kind of reader. And this book is not, I don't think, technically qualified as YA, but it is dang close. And anybody coming fresh off YA and wanting to read adult fantasy, man, this is a good bridge. It's so well done for so many reasons. I thought the magic system is just magnificent. One of the best ones I've ever read. I thought the plot was incredible. I thought the twists, I don't know that I've ever read a series of twists that worked so well for me is what happened in The Hero of Ages, the final book in this trilogy. And I was so excited to hear Brandon Sanderson's vision for what he wanted to do with Mistborn. He wanted to write 3 different trilogies about the age of myth, essentially. And then he wanted to tell a kind of more modern day story where we're remembering the heroes of the past and they're in the distant memory, but they're very much real to these people. And then he wanted to write a final trilogy where people go to the stars, kind of a sci-fi kind of book, where those events in the first series are essentially forgotten, hints of them. And I love this huge time jump plan that he made. And it's not fan service, I don't think, when you do these continuations, when that's your whole plan from the beginning. And it's all built to go to that point. But he never planned on writing Era 2. It just kind of happened one day. And it didn't even stay as a trilogy. It's a, what do you call it? It's a quartet. Now, I think this opinion is going to get a lot more controversial in the next couple weeks because the last book of Era 2 is going to come out. And when books come out, hype train is through the roof, even if they're not good. It takes time for fans to realize a book's not great. It takes weeks, if not months, if not years, because there's so much excitement and people like to like things. And I've fallen victim for that before. I've read something and been like, that was awesome. And then I look back on it a few months later and I go, man, I got sucked in again. I was just so excited to talk to people about it and be involved with the community, and hearing all these positive things made me feel something positive. But Mistborn Era 2 tries so many things that fail for me. One of them is Brandon Sanderson tries to showcase his humor in this book. And I know that humor is subjective. For me, he can't write humor. It's all kind of written the same way, and it's not funny. He's trying to be Terry Pratchett, and he's not Terry Pratchett. There's only one Terry Pratchett, but I think some people can write in the style of Terry Pratchett and make it work really, really well. I thought, for example, that Orconomics was extremely good. It was trying to be Pratchett, and it succeeded. Man, Brandon Sanderson does not have what it takes to write funny characters. What he does is he writes quirky characters and weird characters that gives them these weird personality traits, and he thinks that's what makes them funny. But he lacks the true wit to be able to, and I say that a little bit intentionally, because he does have a character named Wit that he thinks is so funny, and I just don't. I like Wit, don't get me wrong. I just don't think he's funny. But that's one of my problems with this. And one of the characters, one of the 2 main characters, his entire thing is trying to be funny, and it fails. Now, the second thing is, these books are so much shorter, and the tone of them is completely changed. And a thing that makes Brandon Sanderson such an amazing writer is his ability to do twists and do them well. And I don't think twists work as well in shorter books. Twists work well when you've built and built and built, and then you can tumble things down and totally put things on your head, make you revisit things of the past. But when books are so short, the impact is so much lessened, and it just doesn't work for me. I think the magic system, which carries over from the first one, but has all these variances to make it different, failed in so many ways. It doesn't have that concrete magic system that the first one was so good on. It has these combinations of magics. It tries to make things way too complicated for me. And we don't understand all of the rules to it and how all these can blend together. And it ruins that rigid structure that I think made the first one so good. So I'm going to be reading The Lost Metal, the last book in this series. I ordered it. I want to read it. But I mostly want to read it because I'm really excited to continue on into Era 3, because hopefully it can evoke the things that I loved about Era 1. But if this was the last one and there was no more books coming out, I don't even think I'd read it. I'd just be like, yeah, whatever, I'm over it. Let's just move on. Sanderson, show me what else you got, because this one didn't work for me. Next up is my belief that in A Song of Ice and Fire, that A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons are awesome books. I love both these books. They're so good. Now, I do agree that they are not as good as the first 3 books, but I cannot tell you how many times people have told me that the series drops off a cliff on the 4th and 5th books, especially the 4th book, especially A Feast for Crows. I love these books. They're so good, and especially if you read them back to back, when you can actually understand what George R. R. Martin was going for here. Because he wrote these books on the same timeline, just dealing with different people mostly. So I especially like them if you read them at the same time and intersperse the chapters. I almost always will tell people, read things in publication order. But this is one of the very rare times that if you get one of those guides that tells you which chapters to read these books, and you just bounce between them, that you're gonna think that these 2 books combined into one enormous volume are really kind of just as good as the other ones. I love pretty much everything about these books, other than I'm starting to not get the overall vision here, and that I feel like people are getting written into areas that I don't get how George R. R. Martin is going to write himself out of. And it's kind of coming true. You know, George R. R. Martin is having trouble writing the next book. From what everyone is led to believe, he wrote almost all of the book and then kind of started from scratch again because he didn't like where it was going. He got himself into like the Myronese knot, which is this problem he got himself into where he couldn't get Daenerys from point A to point B. I don't really want to say what that is to spoil things. But he runs into these problems. But I don't find that when you read these books that they're problematic for this book. It just makes me concerned for the future of this series. But if you take these books for what they are, they have everything good about them. Do they have amazing twists like the other books? Yep, check. Do they have incredible characters and incredible character development? Check. Do they have awesome battle sequences and crazy kind of gore and dark? Yeah, check. Do they have extremely well-made political machinations and very fun dynamics between the different set of characters that get to play off each other? Yep, big time check. They've got everything, and I truly don't get why people think these books are so much worse, other than they take them on what they are by themselves, and they don't look at them as a whole. They're supposed to be kind of read at the same time. They were written at the same time. They're dealing with the same events, just split up. Do yourself a favor, read them at the same time, get some great appreciation about these, and kind of consider them one huge book. Number 8 is that I believe that E.N.C. Esselman's Malazan books are incredible. Now, this is a controversial take because what you will hear from virtually every Malazan fan is that Steven Eriksen's 10 major Malazan books in Malazan Book of the Fallen are incredible. And that the Esselman books are an enormous step down from those. And while they're serviceable, they're not anywhere close to what Eriksen did. And I just don't agree. They're not as good. But they are so good. And you have to get yourself in the context here, especially for me, where I think Malazan is the greatest series that was ever written. And so, of course, I'm going to say that Esselman's books aren't as good, because I think Eriksen's are the best. But that doesn't mean that Esselman's are bad. And I think that people have a big problem sometimes judging things in the same genre, in this case, in the same book, is they're constantly pitting things against each other. When I think that you should look at these for what they are and judge Esselman for what he's trying to do and stop just trying to compare him to Steven Eriksen. And I think you'll enjoy his books a lot more. Now, he's written 2 main series here. One of them he's completed with, and this was Novels of the Malazan Empire. And while it did have some peaks and valleys, a couple books in particular that I thought were, much lesser, I thought that the good books of his, which I think there's 3 or 4 of them in my opinion, are only a little bit of a step down from some of the Malazan Book of the Fallen books. They have everything that you would love about the Erikson books. They're just written a little bit differently. But, does it have these incredible characters? Yeah. Does it have these incredible moments at the end of the book that just totally bring everything together in this enormous epic event? Yeah. Does it have, this deep kind of look at things with the darker feel and, tons of characters and ones that you might know and love? Yes, it does. These are great, great books. And I think that one of the biggest disservices that I've ever seen from fantasy fans is those that write off 𝐒𝐤𝐢𝐚𝐥 books, especially those that haven't read them, which is most of Malazan's fans. 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐥 books are not read by even a fraction. When I heard that Erikson had a new book coming out, The God Is Not Willing, I heard from some people online that said, look, you might want to read some of these 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐥 books to really understand all the events that have happened after Book of the Fallen, because there's a little bit of a time gap here that you'll fill in and you'll appreciate it more. And so I did. I read all of the 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐥 books, and man, I'm so glad that I did. Now, I don't think that advice is worthwhile. I don't think you have to read the 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐥 books to appreciate The God Is Not Willing. I don't think you're missing out on virtually anything. But I'm so glad that I ended up doing it because they're just awesome. Give them a chance. Don't do yourself the disservice that I did to myself for well over a year. Pick up the books. I think you'll really enjoy them. Now, I don't think you should start on his first book. A Knight of Knives, I think it is not great. It's in fact, I think it's his worst work. Skip that one, go to the next one, because a lot of his books don't have to be read in the perfect order. Some of them do, but I think if you just read the second book in his Novels and Laws and Empire, just kind of read through, and then go back to his when you're done with it, I think you'll appreciate it a lot more. My number 9 most controversial opinion is that I believe Rhaenyra has lasted not a little bit too long, a lot too long. I consider myself a pretty big Rhaenyra fan. I've read almost all the books. I haven't read the most recent one. I'm not gonna read the most recent one. But I loved the 6 books in the main series. They're awesome. I like almost everything about them. I thought they had some books that were better than others, but it's a great, fun series. It's a really good palate cleanser. They're not enormous books. They're decently sized, but they're not enormous. They have a much more light nature to them. They're just like a fun books about these 2 best friends. They go through these adventures together, and there's a bigger plot that kind of gets revealed later on. I thought the ending of the series is great. But again, I think sometimes books wear out their welcome. And this is the definition of that. Because after Michael J. Sullivan finished this series, he said, look, I don't want to keep telling the story of Hadrian and Royce. They finished, they're done, let's go on to something else. So instead of continuing on the series and going, further in after that was done, he said, okay, I'm going to write something different. I'm going to write the prequel series to Hadrian and Royce. Really, Michael J. Sullivan? That's your difference? That's what you did? I don't need a prequel series. Now, having said that, it's good. It's not great. It's not like the other ones. It's a major step down. In part because you already know these things. You already know where they end up. It ruins so much of the tension here. Now, there is individual tension here, and all these books are kind of individual romps, He could write an infinite number of these, and it wouldn't matter, because they're all just individual books. And he is going to write, I think, quite a few of these. I think there's more planned. But yeah, it's a step down. And then he said, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the prequel to that. I'm going to tell the prequel to all of civilization here and talk about the beginnings of the races here on this planet. And man, that series was a hot mess. Now, I know a lot of people love this, and I loved the first book. I thought the first book in that super prequel series was so good, but it drops off a cliff hard. It gets bad. It gets like the most sloggy slogs that you're ever going to read, and the plot just gets in a weird direction, and I don't like it. But so then, this is what Michael J. Sullivan does after that. He says, okay, I'm going to tell a new story now. I'm going to bridge the gap between that ancient story and the prequel series. Come on, man. Like, you're a good author. You don't have to keep writing in this universe for people to be into your thing. You have a following. let's see what you got. It doesn't have to keep being Rhaenyra over and 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 over again. And I don't know that he has plans to stop, because as I look on his Wikipedia page and I see like what books are planned, they're all just Rhaenyra books. There's more of them. You know, there's more in the prequel series. There's, you know, more in this Bridge series. And, you know, I almost guarantee you that he's done with those. He's just going to maybe eventually just go back and write, you know, after the main series or something, because he can't stop himself. Dude, do something new. It's over. My last controversial take, and I'm going to end this on a positive note. I believe that the second and third books from the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch are amazing. And this is controversial because you're going to hear over and over again that the first book in this series, The Lies of Locke Lamora, is as top tier as you get in the fantasy genre. I agree with that. I am obsessed with the book. It's so wonderful for so many reasons. It is a top tier book for me. One of my top favorite fantasy books of all time. And I do think that the second and third books are worse. I think the second one is worse than the first, and I think the third is worse than the second. But of course they're going to be worse. The first book is crazy perfect. That doesn't mean that the other ones are bad. And again, I think that fantasy fans oftentimes have trouble comparing things because they're constantly comparing those books to the first one. And I don't think you should do that. I think that you should read books for what they are. The second book is amazing. It's so good. Yeah, it's not as good, but it has essentially the same structure. It's set in the ocean. I'm a big sucker for ocean fantasy books. It's got a fun heist. I love those too. It rushes the ending. Yeah, that's a problem. But that's it. That's the only problem that book had. It just rushed the ending a little quick. Still a good ending. It just kind of came all of a sudden. But the beauty of that book is the journey that it took to get there. Now the third book, it also rushed the ending. And it made a lot of the events that happened in it kind of become a little meaningless because of what the ending was. But the journey that we took to get there was very fun. Now, I think a lot of people are like, Scott Lynch has lost it. You know, let's just assume that the fourth book is going to be worse than the third because the other ones have followed that track. I don't think that's a fair assumption at all. This is such a small sample size, and you're just going to automatically assume that this guy's done, that he has nothing left, and the next book is going to be even worse. That's an unfair assumption. For all we know, it could be better than the first one. Now that's going to be hard to do, but it could be just as good as the second one or a little bit better than the second one. How would we ever know that? These books rock. Don't listen to everybody that tells you read the first book and just get out of it. Continue on. All right, so those are my top 10 most controversial opinions. I certainly have a lot more than that, but I think these are the 10 that are going to resonate with the most amount of people and say, Matt, that is crazy. That's what I'm going for here. They're honestly my opinions. I get that not a lot of people agree with them, but it's how I feel. I would love to know your thoughts about these. I would also love to know what your controversial opinions are. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know. If you want to talk about it more in person, come to the Discord. You will also see a link down below in the description. I'm always around. I'd love to chat with you. Come and join and let's talk about these books. So thank you so much. I appreciate you sticking with me. And as always, happy reading to you.